Subtitling by Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen. February 11, 2026. We are in the fourth year and on day 353 since the beginning of the full inversion. A warm welcome. I greet you to the situation report first of all. Yes, what you saw yesterday was really very impressive. We have reached 350 channel members. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for the support. Thank you for making it possible that there is little or no external advertising in the situation reports, and for supporting the channel in this way. In today's report, we see various factors, front movements on both sides, but we also see how a drone blows up an entire house. And what we can also see are attacks on Russian oil refineries and their effects, as well as the consequences that came from the Starlink shutdown, because Russia immediately blocked something else afterwards, which will severely harm their own soldiers, and much more. In the Sumi region, near the village of Koshakivka, there was an unusual Russian attack. 10 Russian soldiers approached. It's the very first time that such an advance with snowmobiles has been documented on video. It has been reported before, but this is the first time, as I said, that it has been documented on video. The Ukrainian 71st Airborne Brigade reports that the attack was completely repelled. 4 of the attackers were killed. 6 were taken prisoner. Of course, the claim about the prisoners cannot be independently verified. I have not seen any evidence of that yet. The use of snowmobiles does seem rather improvised at first glance, but it actually follows a clear logic on the Russian side. In winter, such vehicles increase mobility on snowy or difficult terrain. They allow for rapid approach and short reaction times. At the same time, they are loud, offer little protection, and make the attackers highly visible. So it's almost similar to the motorcycle attacks we always see in the summer. Let's take a look at the destructive power of some drones. Here, a kamikaze drone flies into a house where a single Russian soldier is located. The drone flies in, spots him, targets him, and boom! The entire house is blown up. In the past, only a few grams of explosives like a grenade were attached to drones. Here we see the impact of modern drones, which can blow up entire houses. Nevertheless, they are still in high demand and their methods of use are becoming more and more sophisticated. Here, for example, we see another Ukrainian drone lying in wait on the ground next to a supply route, conserving its battery, which is especially useful in winter. When a vehicle passes by, it takes off, initiates an attack, and flies into its target. Ukrainians and Russians use this tactic on many different sections of the front, day after day. Just wait, save battery, attack. Instead of flying in the sky and losing range or flight time. As I mentioned recently, Russian forces are shifting their focus further to the area west of Soledar. There, they have managed to capture Bondane. Since then, they have been consistently continuing their attacks in this sector. The reason is obvious, of course. In the Pokrovsk area, the front has recently stalled significantly. Despite heavy losses and massive use of equipment, Russian troops have not been able to achieve any decisive progress there. Accordingly, they are now looking for movement elsewhere and are trying to build new pressure west of Soledar. This section of the front is operationally very interesting because it could serve as a possible lever to destabilize the Ukrainian lines or at least tie down their forces. Russian units are advancing there step by step, often in small attack waves, supported by artillery and drones. The pattern is well known: slow, gradual advances. They achieve territorial gains in individual villages. After that, there are immediate attempts to advance to the next line, bringing up reserve forces behind them, which has worked very well so far. Russian attacks are always very, very predictable. It's a bit of a shame that this isn't reflected on the situation map or doesn't appear as it was actually discussed 1 or 2 weeks before. Further south, we last looked at the recapture of Ternavata. In the meantime, there is also a confirmed geolocation for the neighboring village of Pridrushne. There, a Ukrainian flag was spotted in the eastern part of the village, roughly at the marked position. That strongly suggests that Ukrainian forces have taken control of the village. Apparently, additional forces were brought in for this small local counteroffensive. The 210th and 33rd. Attack regiments were moved to this sector to carry out the recaptures and stabilize the line, the 110th as well. Regiment, which we still remember from the Battle of Basila Novoselica, is deployed there. This concentration of forces, and especially this combination of forces, shows once again that Ukraine does not just want to recapture the area at certain points, but also wants to secure it sustainably in order to prevent a further Russian advance over Dnepropetrovsk. However, the situation is developing dynamically, because just a little further south from there, we see another Russian territorial gain, namely to the west of Uliaipuli. While Russia is trying to force new breakthroughs west of Soledad, the Ukrainians are stabilizing and countering further south with targeted counterattacks. Both sides are trying to shift their forces along the front to gain local advantages. Of course, the major breakthrough has not happened yet. Instead, we always see a tough struggle for individual villages, river lines, and terrain edges, where every small territorial gain is supposed to be used strategically right away. But as I said, things look a bit different here at Uliaipuli, because here, the 114th has motorized regiment of the Russians photographed a flag in the western part of the village of Salis-Nice. We still remember them from the Battle of Bakhmut in the war against Ukraine, where the 114th Motorized Rifle Regiment was mainly deployed in the east of the country. It was involved in heavy fighting in the Donbass, including Bakhmut, especially in urban combat zones, where mechanized infantry was used to secure and hold captured areas, but also for many assault attacks. Like many other comparable units, this regiment also suffered significant losses during the course of the war, was replenished several times and partially restructured. But nevertheless, in terms of losses compared to territorial gains, they performed better than many other Russian subunits. After the Starlink ban at the front, Russian soldiers continued to use Telegram predominantly for tactical communication, until the Kremlin has now blocked it. But that's remarkable because the Russian army has actually developed its own military messenger apps that soldiers can use. But these alternatives are considered unreliable and extremely cumbersome among the soldiers. A military blogger describes the problem very directly. To get a smartphone that can be used for official purposes, you can't request it from the army. You can't say it openly. Emphasize the timing. Termashwak described, when systems fail, there is often no quick solution. At the same time, it happens because of and due to the Kremlin's blockade. But since these networks are the central means of communication for many units, delays and throttling have a direct impact on combat operations. Now, though, the pressure comes from their own government. In addition, Starlink connections on the Russian side often no longer work in many cases, since they have been whitelisted or are now very heavily restricted. This means that two central digital tools are now under pressure at the same time: satellite internet and messenger communication. Now, however, some Russian bloggers are also reporting that WhatsApp has been blocked and is no longer usable. Another soldier is wondering how they are supposed to keep fighting without communication. He asks if they are supposed to use pigeons for that. The Russian oil refinery in Volgograd is apparently currently under drone attacks. The facility is one of the largest refineries in the country and has an annual capacity of around 14.5 million tons of crude oil. Volgograd is located far from the front line. You might still know it as Stalingrad. An attack there once again demonstrates the current range of Ukrainian drone operations. Refineries are particularly sensitive strategic targets. They are central to fuel supply, both for civilian and military purposes. Every outage has a direct impact on Volgograd, and especially on the surrounding areas, as well as on logistics, transportation, and ultimately also on warfare. So if there are any hits, repairs are usually time-consuming and expensive. Even short-term production interruptions increase the economic pressure on Russian energy capacity, which is already suffering from repeated attacks. Whether and to what extent damage has occurred cannot be determined at this time. What is clear, however, is that attacks on large refineries remain a central element of the Ukrainian strategy to deliberately weaken the economic base of Russian warfare. Ukrainian attacks have severely hit the Russian oil sector in 2025. According to information from the insurance industry, the losses amount to approximately 1 trillion rubles, which is about $13 billion. This is not symbolic damage, but a tangible economic burden. This is serious, and we need to think about it. The Ukrainians only started the major attacks in the middle of 2025, not at the beginning. The consequences are reflected in the production figures. The supply of crude oil and pipelines to the refineries dropped sharply, so much so that it reached the lowest level in 15 years. Overall, oil processing also declined. In percentage terms, the declines initially seem moderate, at around 1.5%. In actual quantities, however, this means millions of tons less processing capacity in a sector that is crucially important for Russia's state budget. Damages from terrorism and sabotage risks have significantly exceeded premium income. Several major providers report multiple losses, which in turn leads to rising insurance premiums and, of course, also causes higher costs for the companies. This means that costs are also rising for the industry, even if no new investments are made, because insurance simply becomes so expensive. Strategically, of course, this is crucial. Ukraine is not only targeting military facilities, but increasingly also the economic base of Russia's war effort. The oil sector is one of the state's most important sources of revenue. Every selection, every repair, every increase in insurance premiums thus increases the financial pressure on the companies themselves or on the state. And the numbers indicate that this strategy is having an effect. It's not about bringing production to a halt immediately. It's about increasing costs, creating uncertainty, and reducing revenues in the long term. In a war that heavily depends on resources, since every war is an economic war, especially here, in a country rich in resources, this is a key lever. Thanks to all subscribers, channel members, and the Algae crew. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Renneke, Robert Siller, Dietrich Brady, and Meyerhofer. Please subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next report.